type design visit to အစီအစဉ်ကနေပြန်လဲကြိုဆိုပါရစေဒီနေ့ကတော့အစီအစဉ်ဒုတိယနေ့ဖြစ်တယ်လို့နောက်ဆုံးနေ့ပေါ့နော်နှစ်ရက် program လေးဆိုတဲ့အခါကျတော့မနေ့ကရောဒီနေ့ရောချိန်ပေးပြီးတက်ရောက်ပေးတဲ့အတွက်ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်ဆိုတော့ဒီမှာလဲတချို့လူမနေ့ကမ join ဖြစ်တဲ့သူတချို့ရှိတယ်လို့တွေ့ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်ချက်ထဲမှာပြောကြတော့လေဒီနေ့စီစဉ်မှာband ကအဓိကသူကများတော့သူ့ရဲ့ presentation ကို English လို့ပြောပေးမှာဖြစ်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့အခါကျတော့ပေါ့နော်ဘာသာပြန်ပေးတဲ့ဆရာရှိနေပါတယ်မြန်မာ English မြန်မာပေါ့နော်ကြွေကိုကမေးခွန်းတွေကိုမေးချင်တယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လည်းမြန်မာလိုမေးလို့ရှိရင်ဒီဆရာကနေပြီးတော့မှတိုက်ရိုက်ဘာသာပြန်ပေးမှာဖြစ်ပါတယ်ဆိုတော့ဒီဘာသာပြန်တဲ့ tools လေးပေါ့နော် Zoom မှာ interpretation tools လေးဘယ်လိုအလုပ်လုပ်တယ်ဆိုတဲ့ဥစ္စာကိုကိုကျော်စရာလင်းကနေပြီးတော့ရှင်းပြပေးပါလိမ့်မယ်ကျေးဇူးပါ
အာမနေ့တော့ငါတက်တဲ့လူတွေတော့တည်ပြီးသားဖြစ်မယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါပေမဲ့ပြန်နှွေးဘယ်လိုမျိုးဖြစ်အောင်လို့တစ်ချက်တော့ပြန်ပြောလိုက်ပါမယ်အဲ့တော့အမ် screen လေးတစ်ချက် share လိုက်မယ်နော် okay အဲ့တော့လောက်ရမှာကလွယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒီမနေ့ကအတိုင်းပဲဘန်ကအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုပဲအဓိကပြောရမှာဆိုတော့အကယ်၍ English နဲ့နားထောင်ရတာနည်းနည်းအခက်အခဲဖြစ်တယ်အဆင်မပြေဘူးဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့မြန်မာ language နဲ့ပြောင်းလို့ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်ပြောင်းလို့ရတယ်ဆိုတော့ဘယ်လိုမျိုးလုပ်ရမလဲဆိုတော့ဒီ Zoom မှာညာဘက်အောင်ဆုံးမှာ interpretation ဆိုတဲ့ဟိုကမ္ဘာလုံးပုံစံလေးရှိရပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဟာမတွေ့ဘူးဆိုတော့လို့ more ရဲ့နောက်မှာတစ်ခုခုရှိလိမ့်မယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ more ကိုနှိပ်ပြီးတော့လဲခလုတ်ကိုလိုက်ပြီးရှာလိုက်ရတယ်အဲ့ကမ္ဘာလုံးပုံစံလေးကိုနှိပ်လိုက်ပြီးသွားရင်ဒီမှာ button ၃ခုကြာလိမ့်မယ်ပေါ့နော် original audio ရယ် English ရယ်မြန်မာရယ်ဆိုပြီးတော့ကြာရယ်ပေါ့နော်အကယ်၍ကို English လိုနားထောင်ခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုရင် English လိုလွတ်ထားပေးလို့ရတယ်အကယ်၍ကိုကမြန်မာလိုနားထောင်ခြင်းနဲ့ဆိုရင်မြန်မာလိုနားထောင်လို့ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ဒါတစ်ခုရှိရယ်ပြီးတော့နောက်တစ်ခုကဒီ Q&A question and answer လုပ်နေတဲ့အချိန်မှာလည်းဟိုဟိုမြန်မာလိုမေးလိုက်ရင်ရတယ်ပေါ့နော်မြန်မာလိုမေးလိုက်ရင်လည်းဒီ transition လုပ်ပေးတဲ့ဆရာကဘန်ကိုအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုပြန်ပြောပြတယ်ဆိုတော့မြန်မာလိုလည်းမေးလို့ရပါတယ်လို့ yes အဲ့ဒါပါပဲကျေးဇူးပါ Oh, Ben, you can now take the floor. Yeah.
Okay, hi. Welcome back, everybody. Nice to see some new people here and some of the old people from yesterday. Okay, let's go straight into stuff. I'm going to recap a little bit just to go over what we said yesterday. Oh, I need to screen share. Hang on. Just to go over what we went through yesterday. Okay, you are screen sharing. Nice. So yeah, I'll just go over some of the main points from yesterday, and then we can move on in a bit more detail to some of the kind of more smaller aspects of type design, making fonts and stuff. So the main things that I wanted to cover yesterday were kind of what is typography, how does it fit into graphic design, what does typography involve, and why do typographers need new fonts? So kind of what's the motivation for making new fonts? Why am I doing this job that I do? And so we went through kind of various things to do with graphic design, explained some of the considerations that we have as font makers when we're thinking about typography and what typographers need to be able to do with fonts. And so talking about different styles and different weights of fonts and perhaps language support and making sure that the fonts can speak the languages that the graphic designers need the fonts to write in. Then we also moved on a little bit into the beginning of my process. And I think I'll say again, like for type designers, everybody seems to have quite a different process. And I guess it's mainly something that you figure out what works for you. And so my process, I've been making fonts for Southeast Asia for a while. My process works really well for me, but for other people, it might be a bit different. So these are some pointers that I found along the way. But if you have other ideas, then absolutely, that's also a great way to do stuff. I'd be very interested actually to hear if there are people doing things in completely different ways. So we did start talking about my process a little bit yesterday, talking about we need to define a brief, like if I'm making a new font, what's it for? Who's asking for it? What does it need to be able to do? And we came across these kind of three main aspects of it. The function of the font, what's it going to be, what's the environment it's going to be used in? Is it going to be used at large sizes on posters and billboards, or is it mainly something that you're going to see on your phone? The next part of the brief would be the feeling. What are we trying to, are we trying to create a nice friendly feeling for the readers, or are we trying to be a bit more serious? Are we trying to be experimental? Are we trying to be businesslike? Are we trying to do something scary? You know, there's different feelings that we can convey with a typeface, with a set of fonts. And so my approach is to kind of note down a big long list of adjectives where I want to describe the feeling that I'm trying to convey. And then when I'm coming to draw the letters later, I can look back at that list and check, is this letter conveying that feeling in a good way, or is there a better way that I can do the same thing? The last part of the brief for me is to think about the forms that we're using. So is the typeface square or round? Is it narrow or wide? Is it tall or short? Like different ways that we can think about the shapes, the letter forms themselves, how we describe those. And so we're building a vocabulary to be able to talk about, okay, well, the letter forms look like these kinds of structures, and those things should be transferable into different scripts. So if we've got a Latin typeface for English, we might say it's a narrow typeface, it's a bold typeface. We can use those same things when we're creating a Burmese extension or a Thai extension. We still want it to be narrow and we want it to be bold in the same way. So I'm not thinking about copying parts of a Latin letter or a Thai letter into Burmese. I'm thinking about how to describe the shapes. And so it's a slightly different, it's a level above just copying the actual shapes that are used in English letters or Thai letters. I don't want to kind of import features of a letter from one script into another, but I can import the vocabulary and the description. And so that's the way I think about a design brief for a typeface. So, for example, thinking about the forms, we can talk about the terminals of the letters might be round or they might be flat, they might be vertical, they might be diagonal. There are different ways that we can describe those. And that's something that we can do in different scripts without just copying part of one letter into a different letter. Same here, like with the open counter. So the space here is fairly open. It's not closing off around too much. Curves are quite dynamic rather than flat or shallow. I think I mentioned yesterday having thinner strokes at the joins. That's also something that we can inherit into other scripts without kind of copying letter forms directly. Having a bit of contrast, so the verticals are heavier than the horizontals, and a compact width. And so describing the form is something that we can apply fairly easily into other scripts. And then, for example, describing the feeling, this was just a few adjectives that I came up with to describe. This is just one letter, but obviously the font has more than one letter. So we can probably increase the length of that list when we look at the whole font. But again, these adjectives can be transferred into another script, and this is where your knowledge of a script will come in really handy. How do we make Burmese letters feel the same way? And this is really a good design question. How can we figure out what genre of Burmese letter forms or type styles we can use to convey the same feeling? So yeah, that's kind of the first stage for me, form, feeling, and function framework, which, yeah, then we can weigh up all of the choices that we make and test. When I'm come to the next stage, when I start drawing the letters, I can look at that framework and think, okay, well, does that letter really match with the brief that I've got, or is there a better way? So it's kind of something that can guide our explorations. And like I say here, it's going to help if we're making a new font or trying to create an extension in a different script, extending a typeface into a new language, into a new script. Kind of, yeah, this is more important for me as a non-Burmese person. I need some way to get familiar with the Burmese script, or if I'm doing Lao or Khmer fonts, then I need a way to understand the letter forms. And so this is kind of more to do with my approach. I'll go and visit the countries and make sure that I have a really good understanding of the different styles. What can we do with the letter forms to make them convey different moods or have different impacts or different personalities? What are the ways that people experiment with their letter forms? And so I've been to Burma quite a number of times and taken lots and lots of pictures, as we saw yesterday, of the different styles that we find there, which can inspire new designs. We can look at these ones and think, okay, some of this might be suitable for the project that I'm working on, or it might give us other new ideas that we can take in different directions and experiment a bit more. So yeah, looking back at the historical forms as well to kind of inform where did these letter forms come from? Why is the Burmese alphabet this way? Why are the shapes the way that they are? Also, manuscript and handwriting is very interesting to show the different ways that letters come out when you write them, because each time you write a letter, it's going to be slightly different. Okay, so we'll see the variation, the natural variation that comes when people write their language. Or the shortcuts, people can write at different speeds. If we're writing really fast, we'll see slightly different shapes than if somebody's writing slowly and carefully. And so that's really good information for a type designer to understand what happens when people write fast or slow or with different tools. Okay, so yeah, that's all about gaining the familiarity. And I say, yeah, this is important for me. It's a bit less important if you know the script, but I would still encourage, if you're designing fonts, I would really encourage you to go out and look at stuff and take lots of pictures of all these kinds of letters, and it might show you stuff that you hadn't really thought about before. I touched on this a bit yesterday. So a lot of the work that I do is trying to support minority languages in Burma. And so I think there's more than 100 different languages spoken in Burma, maybe 120 or something. And I think if I'm making fonts, it's quite important that as many people can use those fonts as possible. And so I want to support Shan language or Mon language or Karen languages. And so this is where the research side comes in, and I'll be spending a lot of time looking through manuscripts from different communities around Burma, talking to people from those communities when I can do, or looking at digitized collections online. For example, this one from Mon people in Thailand, using kind of slightly different letter shapes for some letters. Or Shani in Burma using their own letter forms or their own alphabet, their own orthography, to write their manuscripts. And as I mentioned yesterday, Facebook is really great for reaching those communities because they often have kind of cultural group pages on Facebook where people want to chat about their culture, their history, their identity. And obviously writing and language is a very big part of a community's identity. So, okay, now let's get down to work. We've got some background information. We've got familiar with the script that we want to work on. We know maybe a bit about the languages that we want to support. Where do we actually start making the font? And so for me, this is one of the most interesting parts, or the most exciting part of the project, is getting started and starting to sketch out ideas and test ideas and stuff. So the first step, we've got the brief, we've got the familiarity. Here's where we get going. My first step in the process usually is to sketch out my ideas just with pencil on a piece of paper. And I'm not thinking too much about the details. I'm thinking in very general terms. What style of typeface are we trying to create here? And so when I did the Samsung One Southeast Asia extensions 10 years ago, this was my starting point. I just want to get a sense of what's the overall look going to be? Is it going to be wide? Is it going to be narrow? Is it going to be looped? Is it going to be loopless for the Thai and Lao? Are we going to have those open apertures, open counters that we looked at a little bit earlier, or are we going to close things, make the forms a bit more enclosed? This for me is a very key part. I'm not thinking about the weight of the letter forms yet. I'm just thinking about kind of the skeletons. And so I'll sketch this out on pieces of paper. And often I'll have pages and pages or post-it notes like these post-it notes, and just sketch on these and have it all over my desk and everywhere. So I can see all the ideas that come out of my brain, and then go to the next stage. This is another one where we were doing IBM Plex Thai 6 or 7 years ago. And so you can see I'm thinking a little bit more about the details, like where is the weight going to go? Where is the styling going to go? And so one of the aspects of Plex in the Latin was to have these corners where you've got like a right angle on the inside of the letter and then a curve on the outside of the letter. And because that was such a key part of the Latin design, we needed to figure out how can we apply that Plex corner to the letters of Thai script. Where is the most appropriate or the most natural place that those can fit in? And so we're trying all different kinds of corners over here, and curves even for the beak of the gokai, looking at different ways that we can handle that particular corner or what the letter forms are going to look like, and trying different options, just ideas at this point. Will this idea work? Will that idea be better? How can we handle these kind of dipped heads on some of the letters? I was working with Mark on this one, so these are the sketches that Mark was working on at the same time. So those ones were my sketches. Here's Mark doing the same kind of conceptualization, using sketching as a way to think about the shapes. So this is in the very early stages. He's trying to figure out like what is the direction of our design? What's it going to look like? What's it going to do? How do we apply some of the ideas from the brief into the concept, into the design direction? And so yeah, he's experimenting with completely different ideas from what I had. And I think this is a really good reason to collaborate with somebody, because they're going to have very different ideas. And then you've got a really wide range of options that you can narrow down a bit later, but start with as many ideas as possible, because some of those ideas might really work very well. You don't know till you try. He's also thinking about the beak of the gokai. What's the best way so it's the same feature here, the beak here. How can we implement that? He's thinking about the same questions, and other questions that I hadn't thought of. And so, yeah, really good to collaborate. So we've got some sketches on the page, with lots of different ideas. We want to keep those ideas alive until we know which one we're going to use for the final font. But we need to test which ideas really work. And so, for example, these are some of the options that we had for Plex for 3 different letters. So we drew them all when we started drawing the font in the font editor. We included a lot, not all of the ideas, because some of them obviously we discussed and decided, okay, those ones are not such good ideas. These ones are better. So taking the best ideas into the font editor, and drawing them in a way, I mean, this is not perfect sketches, it's just kind of things to get us started, which direction we want to go in. And so we put them in the font editor. And then we test them. And so this was an HTML testing page that Mark quickly made, where we had the option to choose which version of each letter we want to use and put it all together in a paragraph of text so we can see which letters work best in the paragraph with all of the other letters. So the key point here is we're not looking at letters in isolation one at a time. The letters need to work together. They're meant to be used in words and in paragraphs, in longer texts. And so we have to understand right at the beginning which versions of the letters work best in text, in a paragraph. And this is something that a lot of type designers at the beginning of their careers don't really understand. They'll be drawing letters on the screen, and okay, this looks really nice when it's a big size and I'm editing and it's very beautiful, but then it's going to look very different at a small size in text. And so we have to really start immediately looking at the text setting, ideally in the same environment or the same text that's going to be used in real life. If we know what the font is going to be used for, we can match this kind of text to what we know it's going to be used for. So yeah, this is a really key point to understand how the letters work together, not individually. So we've done our testing and we can see some of the letters work really well. What do? We have to decide. This is the part which, yeah, this takes a bit of practice because often we might draw letters that we get really fond of these letters. I really love this shape. It's so beautiful. But then if it doesn't work very well in text, then we have to throw it away. And this is something where you have to be quite deliberate in your decision making to figure out, okay, well, actually, it's a really nice idea, but it just doesn't work. We need the letters to all fit together in a nice way. So yeah, making decisions about what we do to pick the right letter forms. So when we did, this was a recent project, Futura Myanmar, that we published a couple of months ago. We were not sure at the beginning of the project whether we wanted to have these diagonal terminals or flat terminals. And so, okay, same process. We want to draw all of the options and test and figure out and then decide what we're going to do, which one works best. And we do that by looking at paragraphs. So we might find that when the letters are really big like this, we prefer one version, but when we're looking at a paragraph, we prefer a different version. So we needed to check in text. And so I've got two versions, diagonal and flat. I don't know how well you can see the difference on the video call. But we found, or at least I found, that most of us preferred the diagonal terminals when it's at a big size. But then when we looked at the text, we found that the flat terminals made the texture of the paragraph a bit smoother, a bit easier to read. If we had diagonal terminals everywhere, there's a lot of movement in a paragraph because the terminals are repeated in every letter. And so we made the decision finally to go with the flat terminals on all of the letters to promote a smoother reading experience. So kind of for readability purposes. And so that's kind of a little behind the scenes of how does this process really work. We want to look at the paragraphs and we want to test things, and then we decide, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. So then I guess the next stage we come to is drawing. How do we draw nice letter forms? And I think the first thing I would say is it's really unusual for people to pick up a font editor for the first time and draw nice letter forms. It takes really, really long time for people to get the skill in drawing letter forms. So don't give up if you're starting to draw fonts. Just be patient with it. Take your time. It's not easy to pick up kind of how to draw nice letter forms. The other nice kind of aspect here is that it's an iterative process. What do I mean? I mean, I don't draw one letter and then go on to the next letter and draw that and then go on to the next letter and draw that and then finished. I mean, I draw one letter and then I draw the next letter and then I look at both of them together and I adjust both of them together and then I add the next letter and I'll adjust all of them together. So I'm not finishing one letter before I start the next letter. I'm drawing them all together all the time, revising, editing, adjusting, checking, testing, making decisions. So it's a complicated process to make sure that all of the letters are working nicely together. So yeah, the key is just to be really patient. When I'm drawing letter forms in the font editor, I will normally have I'll draw them at a big size so that I can see what I'm doing, and I'll be adjusting where are the handles, where are the nodes, how are my curves looking, and I'll preview at the same time a big letter filled in so that I can see, okay, are the curves looking nice and smooth? Does the letter feel balanced in a nice way? Are there any problems that I can see that I want to edit? So when I'm looking at kind of the outline and pulling handles around, you can't really get a sense of how the letter looks in its completed form. And so I want to see both at the same time. I guess this is an example of like just the process and what happens during the process, that we might start with a shape and it ends up in a slightly different way. It maybe doesn't look like a big difference, but there's a lot less space here in the final version. These counters are coming further down, a bit lower. When I'm drawing, I also use plugins like this SpeedPunk plugin, which visualizes the curvature, how fast or how slow the curves are, what's the radius of the curve. And so what this is showing is in the early sketches, the curve is not smooth. You can see there's steps in the curvature. So this means that this curve is a bit tighter than this curve. When I want to balance it, then the curves match up on both sides of the node. We can also see some of the other problems, like this curve is getting tighter and tighter. The curve is getting more. The width here of the pink section is larger than the width of the orange and the gray sections here. So that means that the curve is getting tighter. It's getting more tension in the curve, which I want to even out and keep fairly consistent around the whole shape. So that's kind of a nice way to visualize and help us see the problems in letter forms, is to use kind of a curve visualizer. So yeah, eye for detail. This is a kind of a core skill. We have to look really carefully at what we've drawn when we're testing it, so that we can find any problems or any difficulties. And the longer you look, the harder you look, the more problems you'll find. And hopefully, the more you look, the more you'll figure out how to solve some of those problems. So yeah, keep checking in text sizes. in full paragraphs and at different sizes, because something at like 8 point will look different at 14 point or 18 point. So keep checking at all different sizes as you work. Patience. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of kind of specific things in Burmese script. And here we're thinking about optical compensations. And so, for example, this is Futura Myanmar again. And normally we think of these two letters, the da and the a, need to look the same shape. But don't be afraid to cheat a little bit. If the shape doesn't work, like I wanted it to connect smoothly, the two bowls, because Futura is a very simplified design, geometric simplified design. And I couldn't get it to connect smoothly when I used this shape. So don't be afraid to cheat. If you need to cheat, that's fine. I've just moved, you can see I've moved the diagonals up a bit in the letter A, so that I can connect it in a nice way. And hopefully that's not too noticeable when you look at them side by side. Hopefully. This is another one where there's a bit of optical compensation that I didn't really think about when I started making Burmese fonts, Myanmar fonts. That obviously the Burmese alphabet is based on the circles. And if we want to cut the opening out of a circle, we might think, okay, we'll just cut it and it's fine. But when we start cutting it out, we find, okay, this letter is now a little bit too high. It's shorter than the letter wa. So we probably want the two letters to be the same height. And if we cut a part of a circle out, it's no longer the same height. We can see on the ka, this is now a bit too high compared with here. And if we look here, for me, that's quite noticeable to see the difference in size. So what are we going to do here? Well, my approach is to stretch this one down a little bit so that it matches the same height. So we can see in the background layer, this is the wa, the original circle, but I'm pulling the terminals down a bit just so that it can match to be the same height on both sides. So this is, again, I would consider this an optical compensation. We still want it to look circular, but sometimes when things need to look the same, they need to be drawn in a different way slightly. And now they're matching the same height. So if we go back to that one and then compare with that one, hopefully the second one looks better. This was another one that I see in fonts, especially fonts made by people who are not from Burma, that they don't really know how to make a bold Burmese typeface. And so this is Noto Sans Myanmar. And if we look at, well, first thing that I notice here is that the short na and the long tail na are different shapes completely. This is quite narrow and this is quite wide. And so that's, to me, that looks odd. I don't know, for Burmese people, that might be okay, but I think it's probably better if they match. But the other thing that I notice here is this is getting really clogged. Like I can't see really, it just looks like a big blob. There's no space in the letter form. I can't really see clearly the outline, everything's sticking together. And so when I'm drawing type, I want to avoid that kind of problem. So let's go back to our photo archive and see, maybe that's got some ideas that we can use. This is how I use the research or the photo archive that I've created. And I'm going to look specifically for this letter, the na, and how do we figure out in a bold weight, how do we figure out so that it's not going to be clogged? And we can see immediately, okay, well, they're making the inner stroke much, much lighter, or they're connecting it across here. So the main strokes are much heavier. This one doesn't need to be bold. And we see, okay, this is a slightly different way. They've taken this side to be the light side and kept this one bold. Okay, so there are different answers, different responses to that question, but mainly it's the inner stroke that is staying nice and light so that we can see this counter and this counter inside without everything getting mushed together. So that might be what happens if we start drawing a really bold weight. We don't really think that's going to work very nicely. Here's a possible solution to that question. Okay, we're going to keep the bold on this part and this part, a little bit bold here, and thin the interior stroke so that it's not all getting crushed together. Again, optical compensation. For things to look right, we need to cheat a little bit in some places. This is an example where they really needed a bold typeface. I think here probably the app that they were using has just put a stroke around the outside of the letters and everything's got very clogged. And so this is not, for me, this doesn't look very nice. Than that, again, there's no counter space visible at all. It's just a blob. And so this shows me, okay, what they really need was a bold typeface, a bold condensed typeface, instead of putting a stroke around to make the letters heavier. That doesn't work so well. And so, yeah, we need to think about font families with a big range of weights for newspapers like this, where they need particular styles to work. And I think also here the problem is partly that newsprint absorbs the ink, and so the ink spreads even more when it's printed on this very porous paper. I think for Burmese fonts, because the character set is often quite big, we need to be really thoughtful about how we organize our work. So thinking about what languages we want the font to support, what characters those languages need, and also, especially for the languages in Burma, a lot of characters will need alternate versions for different situations. Like we saw with the na, we've got the long tail na and the short tail na if we want to put something below. And so there's often a lot of alternate glyphs that we need in Burmese and other languages in Burma. And so this is the way that I organize stuff when I'm drawing. I don't know if that's clear enough to see, but I'm starting with the consonant letters, and I'm looking independent vowels, mainly for Bali. Virama sequences, so I'm showing the subjoined consonants, and conjuncts in there as well, and Ginzi with various other bits and pieces. Then I've got the medial letters. So for Burmese, Yapin, Yaip, some Mon medial letters for Mon language, the medial La, the Na, and the Ma, and some combinations here with vowels. Then vowels, again, I tend to put those in the order that they are going to be typed. When people are typing in Burmese, you have to type this letter before this letter before this letter. So I tend to just keep them in the same order that people will type it. Hopefully that helps people who are inputting text from a character browser or something. They can quickly find the letters they're looking for. Then I put tone marks in there, and these are mainly for Karen languages, and so Po, Bao, and some Burmese ones. Numbers and punctuation in there. So I want to keep everything as clear and easy to find as possible, so that when I'm working, I'm not looking around all the time. I can't remember what that glyph is called or where to find it. I want to find it quickly. And so I think organization is quite an important part when we're making fonts that have many glyphs. And we can see how many different versions of some of these glyphs. So the Yapin, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. I don't know if that one's really included. And then the Yayip, quite a lot of versions there, maybe 30, 40, I don't know. But keep them all together so that we can find and edit them easily when we need to. I think that's about 230, 250 maybe glyphs altogether for this font, and it's supporting Burmese and Shan and Mon and maybe 3 or 4 Karen languages. Technical skills. So this is something that really causes problems for Burmese because it's quite complicated to go from when people are typing Burmese on a keyboard, what does the font need to do to reassemble those characters into the correct presentation? And so this is quite technical work behind the scenes to put programming or engineering into the font to make everything correct, to have the right font shaping, text shaping. So we need to understand this is what goes wrong if we don't put the font shaping in, or if the operating system doesn't support Burmese. And so this example is a while back when I was starting making Burmese fonts. And this was Chrome browser on Mac OS showing the BBC Burmese website. And we can see like there's just problems. We've got all these not defined boxes happening at the top. We've got dotted circles where the font isn't putting together the characters in the right way. Some of these problems are to do with the font. Some of the problems are to do with the operating system. And so if we're making fonts, we have to know which parts are the responsibility of the font maker. How does it work? How does it all go together? This is another example from Kuala Lumpur, I think, by a colleague there who saw this poster. And that's, again, these problems with the dotted circle makes it completely unreadable. And again, the not defined, and then I don't know what this one is. It's supposed to be the Virama, but it should be underneath. I don't know what software they're using. But this is probably very familiar to the Burmese people, right? That you see this kind of problem quite regularly. This this was a font that we saw recently that got published for the Vivo phones, the Vivo Myanmar. And we can see there's just so many problems here. It looks like the font maker didn't really understand what they were doing. They thought, okay, we can just draw these glyphs, everything will be fine. But no, you need to have the technical knowledge to make things shape the right way, to shape the text in the right way. And so, yeah, you can't really make Burmese fonts without understanding some of the engineering stuff. This was our font, the Futura Myanmar, that we published only a couple of months ago. And we just saw, okay, InDesign is not using the right version of Halfbuzz. So Halfbuzz is the text shaping engine that the browsers use. InDesign also uses it to compose Burmese text, but it's using an old version of Halfbuzz. And so we found, okay, we've got these problems. As font makers, if we know the problems, we can try to put in a workaround. We can try and fix any problems that we see. So hopefully now that problem is solved. I don't have InDesign to test it, but I think it's looking fine now. So yeah, we need to know this kind of stuff. So when we type this letter, and this, we need to know what's the intention, what's the result supposed to look like, how are we putting these letters together. these letters are actually new characters, which hopefully will be going into Unicode in one of the future versions. And so it's probably a bit unfamiliar to you guys at the moment. But it's the same principle. We need to know, okay, what happens when we're typing text? What is the order that people are typing the letters? Or what is the order that the characters are stored? And then we can decide, okay, well, how do we want those characters to be rendered? So we need to know which letters. So obviously this character needs to sit in front of the consonant, and this one needs to sit behind. This one obviously attaches to the last part of the syllable. We need to know the rules of the writing system, but we also need to know how Unicode is shaping, reordering some of the characters, and put some instructions in our font. So, for example, this is when we're making the font, the instructions to tell the font to put the subjoined consonants below. And so when somebody types the virama and a letter, then we want it to go underneath. We want to use the below form of the consonant in a conjunct. And so this is the kind of instructions that I'll write into the font to make sure the font understands what to do with sequences of characters in there. And I try to keep the comments in there as well so that I can see, why did I write this one, or what's this supposed to do? Just so that I can remember when I look at it later, what are we doing here? This is something that I've really found in the experiences that I've had making fonts, is usually people really want to help. When you ask questions, they want fonts to support the documents that they're writing, the text that they're writing. They need new fonts. They want to help improve the fonts that are available. And so when I reach out to font designers or academics or linguists or computer science people or Unicode people, everybody is usually really keen to get involved and has advice or feedback or suggestions, or examples and other resources and stuff. And so I think people understand that there is a need for better quality fonts in Burma and for a wider range of fonts and font styles. And so, in my experience, when I'm asking questions, it's really helpful that people definitely want to get involved and help. And so, don't be afraid if you're making fonts, but you've got questions or you don't know how to do stuff, or if you need help, don't be afraid to reach out, and including me. Like, I'm happy to help any designers if I know the answers to stuff, or if I can point people in directions to find out answers. I'm always happy to help. And so yeah, I would say if the complexity of making Burmese fonts is becoming an obstacle for you, then ask other people. There's a community out there who want to help. So, okay, these, I guess, was just to sum up some of the things that we've talked about, the essential knowledge and skills that we need if we're going to be making fonts. Um, and I guess we can see, like, it's a real mix of different disciplines. Like, we need to have creativity, we need to have sensitivity to form and aesthetics, but we also need to be quite scientific in our testing. We might have kind of a hypothesis which letters might work, but then we test them and then we have a conclusion. So that part is quite scientific. We also need to be organized in project management, but we also need the technical skills. And so it's a real mix of different skills that goes into making fonts, especially for me as an outside person. I'm not in Burma. So I need a way. This is kind of where these parts come in, the research and the photo archive, to kind of build my familiarity with the letter forms that I need to draw. And yeah, so for me, it's a really rewarding career because there's so many different skills and it's using different parts of my brain to stretch in all different ways. And so, yeah, I would say if you're thinking about becoming a type designer, or if you want to continue expanding your skills, then think about some of these different disciplines and how you can get better knowledge of those. There we are. That's all I wanted to say today. So let's go to some questions. I did see some popping up. If I stop the sharing, where has the chat gone? Okay. Thank you for all the reactions. That's really nice to see people are happy with the presentation. Okay, what have we got? Okay, Randy says, could you share some advice for those who would like to study typography from the beginning? Any guidance would be appreciated. So I would say, like, the way that I got started was by looking at fonts that people had made already and kind of seeing, okay, what parts of those fonts are working really well or what parts don't work. I didn't actually study graphic design and typography myself. I studied just type design. And so for me, it's just a question of looking at graphic design, looking at typography, and thinking, what do I like about this person's work, or what do I dislike? And just being able to tune in my eyes to how does type really work? How does text work? How do we make text readable and presentable and to be able to communicate the message in a clear way? So for me, it's always just been kind of learning by myself, except for when I did type design and I did my master's at Reading in typeface design, and then obviously learning in a classroom with 10, 12 other students as well. I think probably what I would say these days, because my studies were a while back, I think these days there's more of a community online talking about fonts and people within Burma specifically making fonts or talking about fonts. And so even if there's not opportunities to study those subjects at college, there are people doing that kind of work. And so if there's ways to connect through Facebook groups or chats or Slack channels, I don't know what people are using these days. But there is definitely a community there. And if you can join in somehow and ask the questions that you want to ask, I think that's probably a really good way. Oh, this was my question. How many font designers do we have today? Uh, there's a couple of answers. People participating in the font making course. So people are interested, even if they don't want to become a type designer as a profession. People are interested to learn this stuff. That's nice. That's what I was hoping. Motion graphic animator and graphic designer interested in making types. Good. When designing a Burmese typeface with different weights, what are the key points to consider in its initial shapes? What are your tips for designing different weights? That's a really good question. As we saw with the bold weight in the Na letter that was getting very clogged up, my advice would be start with the bold weight if you can and test how it's going to work on the complicated letters. And so let me go back to screen share. Share. So for example, when I'm thinking of complicated letter forms, I might be thinking about some of these ones. So I would say the best way to make sure that your font is going to work in a bold is to start with the really complicated shapes where there are a lot of strokes happening inside the letter. Like this one is quite difficult to draw in a bold. So maybe start with that and see how bold can I draw this? And then you know that you're not going to have problems in the other letters. These ones with the little baby letters below, how do we squeeze them in, or do we push them down a bit further? So this typeface doesn't really go very bold. This is just medium weight. But if you've got a very bold weight that you need to do, then these can become quite a problem. So I would say start with some really difficult letters, and then see, like, maybe really bold is not possible if we want things to stay clear. What is the key point to consider in its initial state? Yeah. So yeah, for designing different weights, start with the complicated ones. Light weights are usually pretty easy. I haven't got an example of a really skinny font open at the moment. I find lightweights really easy to draw because you don't have problems of clogging, and you know, you can just focus on kind of the skeleton of the letter. How do you deal with ascender descender while designing a typeface, since Burmese writing system have upper, lower mark and stacks? Yeah, so that's that's the really important thing, is that in Burmese you've got these three levels, where the characters need to sit. So it's quite different from Latin, where we've just got one layer. This is something that really depends on the brief. And so for example, when we did the fonts for Grab, for the Grab app, that are using actually an older version of this font, we had to talk through, okay, what is the actual size of the user interface on the Grab app, and how much space upstairs and downstairs can we use? And so what we had is specific user interface fonts, UI fonts, to avoid problems of clipping where the letters disappear above and below. So we don't want clipping. So we actually created a special UI version, the user interface version of the fonts, where the Burmese letters were lifted up a little bit so that we didn't get the clipping problem, or at least I think there still was a clipping problem because they didn't quite give us the right information. But I think that's fixed now in the current app. So this is a case where we need to talk to the client and sometimes educate the client. Okay, if you've got your app that was designed for English or a different script, you might need to change the user interface a little bit for Burmese, or we might need to shrink the Burmese to a slightly smaller size so that we don't get problems with clipping. Yeah, we need to kind of talk through these questions at the very initial stages with the client so that we know how we're going to avoid problems of clipping. Thank you for that question. Last one. I'm a student in UI UX design, but I'm quite interested in creating my own font. Any tips to get started? Yeah, I would say just get started. Just give it a try. If that means you want to sketch on paper or try like calligraphy or anything that way, that should be easy enough. If you're on a Mac, I would really recommend Glyph software, which is what I use, this software. Which there should be like a student license, a special discounted price for students. If you get in touch with the Glyphs people, they'll be able to tell you about that. If you're not on a Mac, the options would be Font Lab or, well, mainly Font Lab. You could try Font Forge, which is the open source software, but I didn't really like that when I tried it a while back. Font Lab might also have a student discount. I don't know. I haven't used Font Lab for years and years. those two would be the main ones. They might even have kind of mini versions. I know there's a Glyphs mini version, which doesn't have all the complex things that you don't need as a beginner. So you could see a Font Lab also has like a mini version, the kind of simplified version that will be cheaper. Otherwise, I guess, yeah, reach out to other type designers that you know from this group, this community that we have now through the Goethe-Institut. Reach out and see how they got started or what software and tools they're using. So, yeah. Okay, any more questions? I'm going to stop sharing again. There we go. Any more questions?
Can you explain a little about future AI? Can something for die designer?
About AI,
Yeah.
I'm not very convinced by AI. I haven't seen people are asking, are you worried about AI in your career? And at the moment, no, I'm not really worried about it because I think the key thing with AI is it needs a lot of information to create a model. It needs to find patterns, right? It needs to have a big analysis of lots of stuff. And I think at the moment, the work that I do is in the Southeast Asian script, so Burmese, Thai, Lao, Khmer, and some other stuff. There just isn't enough information for an AI to train on. There are not that many retail fonts for Burmese or Khmer or Lao. And so it would be very difficult for an AI to try and create predictions or to come up with answers of how should a Burmese font be drawn or a Lao font be drawn. There just isn't that information. And I think that makes it hard for us as type designers, but it also means we're a little bit protected from the AI threat that people are fearing about at the moment. And so it doesn't really concern me at the moment. I don't personally use AI tools for anything. I don't like many of the things that it's promoting. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to stay aware of the problems and the issues, and maybe if there are advantages, I should be aware of that as well. But at the moment, I'm like not really interested. Oh, there's another question in here. We should create an option to collect feedback. And yes, that's really nice. If we want to do another workshop, I'd definitely be open if there's interest. I mean, we've still got quite a lot of people here, so it seems like there's a lot of motivation and a lot of interest to continue this. So it would be really nice to explore what we can do in the future to keep this going. Good. Okay. Shall we leave it there for today then?
Maybe she did me.
Oh, there's a question just popped up. How do you balance the need to preserve the historical calligraphic identity and forms of a script? For example, the rounded shapes of Burmese or Khmer scripts derived from palm leaf carving, with the demands of modern legibility, digital screens, and contemporary graphic design trends. Oh, that's a complicated question. I love it. I always want my work to be respectful of the heritage of different scripts, different language communities. It's a very interesting challenge to, like, some of the fonts that we make, it might be the first time that that particular version of the script has been converted into a font. So we've been working on some Daipake fonts based on old manuscripts from maybe 100, 200 years ago, and the handwriting from those manuscripts. And I think to convert that into a digital font, for me, I feel like I need to be really very confident in understanding the letter forms. And so I will look at loads and loads and loads of manuscripts to really understand, okay, well, there's different options for this letter. And so in this community, this letter is that shape. And in a community nearby, the letter is a slightly different shape, or it's a different scribe making the manuscript, or it's a slightly different date and things change, things evolve. And so I feel like I want to understand as much of the context as possible before I make the decisions about, okay, which version do we include? I think mainly the questions like the type designer skill is in saying, okay, well, now I know what letter form I want to have, which one I want to choose from the manuscripts. How do I convert that into a type form? And the type designer's skill is in saying, okay, well, these are the important parts of the letter. This needs to feel balanced somehow. It needs to fit in with the other letters. Like every letter needs to be similar size or the same size for things to look even and neat and regular. We need to have the same kinds of curves on all of the different letters, although they're different shapes. We need to have some kind of similarity in the tension of the curves. And yeah, I would say it takes a bit of experience and confidence and sensitivity to be able to convert what you see in handwriting into something that works on the screen. And I think another part there would be to say, like, I always want to get feedback from people in those communities to say, okay, does this look nice? And they might say, no, that part of the letter's too big, or that part of the letter's too small. Okay, well, I can change that. That's easy. And so have a dialogue, have a discussion with people in the community to find out how do they really think about their letters, and have I translated it accurately to how they feel about the letters. And so, yeah, it takes practice and it takes kind of feedback to hit a good balance, I think, there. Oh, is there going to be a recording of yesterday's meeting? I don't know the answer. I think there is. I think somebody was recording yesterday, but I don't know how. I think it might be published at some point, the recording.
Yeah, yeah. အဲ့ဒါဟိုကိုသေးမှာလောက်ထားတယ်ပေါ့နော်ကျွန်တော်တို့နောက်ပိုင်းပြန်ပြီးတော့ကိုသေးနဲ့မေးပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပြန် share ပေးပါမယ်ဟုတ်
Good. Okay.
Hello, Ban. I have some question. မြန်မာလိုပဲမေးလိုက်ပါဟုတ်ဒီ font design လုပ်တဲ့လူတယောက်က programming skill လိုတယ်လို့ပြောတယ်ပေါ့နော်ကျွန်တော်လည်းသိတယ်ဘာလို့လဲဆိုတော့ဒီ automation တွေလုပ်ရတာဟုတ်အစအဆုံးဆွဲမယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လူပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တယောက်အနေနဲ့မတတ်တာဘူးပေါ့နော်အများကြီးဆွဲရတာ combination တွေအများများတော့ automation လုပ်ဖို့အတွက်ကို Python သုံးတယ်လို့သိထားတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့ Python ရဲ့ programming skill ကbeginner လောက်လိုတာလား intermediate လောက်လိုတာလား advanced လောက်ထိသိဖို့လိုတာလားဆိုတာလေးဖြေပေးစီချင်ပါတယ်
So if it depends on what software you're using. If we're using, for example, in glyphs that I use, it already has quite a lot of automation for Burmese. I don't think it's complete, but it'll do like 60%, 70% of the work for you. So when I open a Burmese font, it's gonna, or if I want to make a Burmese font in glyphs, it already has a list of the characters that I might want to include, a list of the glyphs that I might want to include. If I put those into the font and click on the automated code button to generate automatically, then most of the work will be done for you. So if you're a beginner, you don't need to have in-depth technical skills, but I would really recommend to try and understand how does OpenType work? How do I write the rules in there? Because you might want to do things in a different way from the automated system. So it is possible without any technical knowledge to create a basic Burmese font, I think. I don't use the automatic features because I always want to control precisely what the font is going to do. And so I'll write my own code in every time. And usually that means that every font that I make has different rules, different behaviors slightly. So yeah, it's good if you can begin to understand about OpenType, and I can maybe share some links later that can help understand like where do we learn about OpenType syntax. It's really going to help you a lot if you can start to learn that stuff, or if you can ask somebody else to help you with it. There are people, when I started making Burmese fonts, I hired a font engineer separate from me. I wanted to focus on drawing the shapes and hired somebody else to do the engineering part of it. So if you really don't have the skills or the time to learn OpenType, there are people who can help with that as well, different font engineers.
Yeah, we have the main problem is OpenType featuring in Myanmar font making. So there's a big problem for the normal creation.
Well, I mean, if we want to continue this kind of series of webinars, I could do an introduction to OpenType stuff if there is enough people to make it worthwhile. If there's even just a small bunch of people, we could do something like that. Oh yeah, somebody's put a link in the chat for the OpenType cookbook. That's a good one. Okay, let's leave it there for today, and hopefully we'll do some other session at some point in the future, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Van.
Excellent. Well, I'm very happy to share, of course. Yeah, stay in touch, everybody. Take care.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.